Good morning, Madam Chair, my fellow presenters on the dais, and ladies and gentlemen. Today, I would be speaking on the topic of human rights and Asian values. This being a very, very vast subject, I would not go into particular country perspectives, but I would largely dwell on the bigger idea of human rights, Asian values, and the prevailing dichotomy, which most times seems a little unnecessary. Um, in the aftermath of World War II, the Allied powers, in an apparent effort to initiate peace maintenance measures, formed the United Nations, which officially came into existence on October 24, 1945. The right of all people to be treated equally and with dignity was enshrined under international law with the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which we commonly know as the UDHR, by the UN General Assembly in 1948. The stated objective of the proclamation of this declaration, as per its preamble, was to secure the universal and effective recognition of the rights contained therein. Here, the idea of universality is key. The fundamental premise for this sense of universalism was that human rights as such are those that apply equally to all nations without exception. This concept of universality is actually something that has not found favor with many Asian countries which have vociferously resisted the human rights and democracy discourse emanating from the West. The Asian critique of the Western notion of human rights or of the universal human rights is based on the concept of what we know as Asian values. The Asian values ideology emanates from the proposition that there are values and patterns of behavior that are common to Asian countries and peoples. What then are these Asian values? One explanation that has been forwarded for this phrase reads thus. When Asian countries speak of Asian values, they are referring to such shared beliefs, such as respect for authority, belief in strong family ties, belief in frugality, hard work, saving, and sacrifice. Asia varies greatly across and within its regions with regard to ethnic groups, cultures, environments, economics, historical ties, and governmental systems. Therefore, there is a very good chance that this set of apparently shared values amongst Asian countries is actually an oversimplification of the value systems and diverse cultures present therein. A vast amount of literature exists today on the debate between human rights and Asian values. Further, it is not always necessary that each of these literary materials would state the differences between West and Asia, considering both in its entirety. Therefore, here I would like to introduce one school of thought which dwells on the differences between East Asia and the United States. Mr. Mahathir Mohamad, who till date remains Malaysia's longest serving Prime Minister, listed the 6 important societal values of East Asians as follows: an orderly society, societal harmony, the accountability of public officials, openness to new ideas, freedom of expression, respect for authority. Further, according to him, the comparable values held by Americans are freedom of expression, personal freedom, the rights of the individual, open debate, thinking for oneself, and accountability of public officials. If we cull out the common values from these, what we are left with are the differences, which includes order, harmony, and authority in the East Asian list, and of personal freedom and individual rights in the American list. This contrast captures the core of many accounts of the supposed differences between Asian and Western values. East Asians give priority to order-supporting values, whereas Americans privilege rights-related values. Therefore, we are made to understand how the Asian challenge is actually a challenge to the value of rights. This differing value of rights is the point of divergence in the discussion of human rights and Asian values. There are certain arguments that have been forwarded in favor of the Asian values discourse. The foremost argument in this favor is that this entire thing stemmed from a sense of wariness towards interventionist tactics being employed by the West via the human rights discourse in order to maintain hegemony and retard Asian growth in the post-war period. Spokesmen for Asian values commonly portray the West as morally decadent. Lee Kuan Yew had been quoted to say that in the United States, the individual has acquired the right to behave or misbehave as he pleases. Mr. Yu's views of Western decadence is in fact shared by many Western conservatives. Proponents of Asian values hold that strong states with limitations of human rights are necessary for economic development. Now, there are 2 versions to this. There is a synchronic and a diachronic version to this argument. The synchronic version claims that Asian culture has these values whilst Western culture does not. That the Asian model of development is superior and that therefore a more authoritarian interpretation of human rights is justifiable. The diachronic version holds that these values have been preconditions of economic development in both Asia and the West, and that Asia will follow the West in liberalizing polity and society once an appropriate level of economic development has been achieved. Whereas some Asian leaders have taken the more liberal diachronic position, Mr. Lee has, by suggesting a causal connection between toleration and disorder, lent support to the more authoritarian synchronic argument. There is also an overlapping of the Western notion of human rights and the concept of Asian values in this entire prevailing dichotomy. The analysis of the concepts such as Asia and the West show that each refers to a complex cultural reality. Almost all the values said to be Asian are similar to conservative Western values, and all the questions about the relations between human rights and other values that have been said to arise from the distinct nature of Asian cultures have been and are still being debated in the West. The view that the basic ideas underlying freedom and rights in a tolerant society are Western notions and somehow alien to Asia is a little difficult to make sense of, even though that view has been championed by both Asian authoritarians and Western chauvinists. The idea of Asian values attempts to find legitimacy through the concept of cultural relativism. In fact, the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, which was referred to by Madam Chair, whilst attributing 4 characteristics of universality, indivisibility, interdependence, and interrelatedness to all human rights, also stated that the realization of these human rights must be considered in the regional and national context, bearing in mind different political, economic, legal, social, cultural, historical, and religious backgrounds. Within the construct of positing Asian values against the Western notion of human rights, values such as privileging the community over the individual, respect for authority, and filial duty are dichotomized against Western values such as individualism and materialism. By extension, this implies that Asian societies have their own way of doing things, which completely invalidates the play of Western ideas within Asian societies. Echoing Professor Amartya Sen's views, it can be said that what actually needs to be answered in this entire discussion is whether Asian countries share the common feature of being skeptical of freedom and liberty while emphasizing order and discipline. Is there a shared mistrust of the claims of liberal rights? The effects of this alleged dichotomy were visible in the formation of 2 intergovernmental bodies in the post-war period, ASEAN in the East and the European Union in the West. The impetus behind the formation of both was in different lines. Though the objective of both the bodies was to provide security for its members, Western Europe sought to do this by increasing interdependence through regional integration, while Southeast Asia chose to do this by establishing the norm of non-interference. The lack of a shared ambition for regional integration within the Southeast Asian member states can be deduced from the fact that the first ever summit of ASEAN leaders did not take place until 1976, over 8 years after ASEAN's formation, and there were only 4 summits in the first 25 years of ASEAN's existence. In this long-standing debate between the concepts, the real issue to be pondered is not whether non-freedom perspectives are present in Asian traditions, but whether the freedom-oriented objectives or perspectives are absent there. It is agreed that cultural diversity must be given its due regard. However, excessive reliance on the language of cultural relativism has the potential to construct fabricated dichotomies and posit Western and Asian values as irreconcilable opposites. The language of cultural relativism has often been exploited by various state leaders and high officials to justify and rationalize repressive policies, despite such policies having no philosophical or cultural justification. It is suggested that the debate about supposed Asian and Western values rests on false premises about the nature of these values, and that a cosmopolitan approach that recognizes both the genuine cultural diversity and the interdependence of peoples in the contemporary world is more likely to promote the legitimate aims of economic, social, and political development. What the Asia-Pacific region is looking to achieve today is regional integration, and it is widely believed that the cultural diversity and the lack of a shared regional identity make it difficult for this to take place. The dichotomy aside, any moves attempting to achieve this should be made under close scrutiny to ensure that they are in harmony with the rules and regulations of international law, particularly basic human rights norms. In conclusion, I would like to say that the idea of universal human rights does not represent an attempt to impose a particular culture on those who would perhaps prefer another, but rather a proposal for the rules under which people who pursue diverse goals in a complex, rapidly changing, and highly interdependent world hope to live in dignity and peace. Thank you for a patient hearing.